The studio lights shifted softly as four individuals settled into their seats, each carrying a completely different worldview, yet all sharing the same intensity in their eyes. The air felt charged and not with hostility, but with the anticipation that something meaningful was about to unfold. The moderator posed the first question with deliberate calm. What do you believe is the single greatest force shaping human behavior? One voice immediately jumped in, arguing that everything begins with fear. According to this view, fear is the quiet architect behind most decisions. A fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of the unknown. It was suggested that even kindness sometimes hides fear underneath, like the fear of being alone or the fear of not being seen as a good person. The argument felt bold, almost unsettling, yet strangely compelling. If fear truly held that much power, then perhaps humanity's greatest struggle wasn't against each other, but against itself. Another voice disagreed sharply. Fear, it claimed, is too primitive to explain the complexity of human behavior. The real force, according to this perspective, is aspiration, the desire to grow, to build, to understand, to evolve. Everything from science to art springs from aspiration, not fear. People climb mountains, write books, invent solutions, and challenge injustice not because they are afraid, but because they are driven by something higher, something that pushes them forward rather than backward. This idea carried an energy that made the room feel a little brighter. The third voice entered more quietly but with a deeper confidence. Both fear and aspiration were acknowledged as powerful, but not the ultimate force. The real driver, it argued, is meaning. Humans endure unimaginable pain when they believe it matters, and they abandon comfort if it feels empty. People fall in love because it gives their life meaning. They sacrifice for family because it makes their existence feel purposeful. They fight, create, travel, pray, protest, learn, and dream, all because they are searching for something that makes their story feel worth living. Meaning, it claimed, is the hidden compass that everyone follows, even when they don't realize it. For a moment, no one spoke. It wasn't silence yet, it was absorption. Three ideas hung in the air, each true in its own way. Fear, aspiration, meaning. The moderator let the tension settle before shifting to a deeper question. If meaning is so important, where do people find it? One argued that meaning is built through connection of friendship, empathy, shared struggles. Meaning is something humans create together. Another insisted that meaning is discovered individually, through personal challenges and inner transformation. The third suggested that meaning comes from aligning oneself with something larger than the self, whether it is a cause, a philosophy, or a vision of the future. The debate grew richer, sharper, but never cruel. They challenged each other with curiosity rather than aggression. Every viewpoint shaped the discussion like clay being molded in different pans. As the conversation evolved, it became clear that the question wasn't simply what shapes human behavior, but what shapes a human life. Some argued that life is a puzzle people spend years trying to solve. Others claimed it is a landscape people spend years trying to explore. Another suggested it is a story people spend years trying to write, revise, and rewrite until it finally feels like their own. What none of them expected was how much they were learning from each other, how perspectives they once dismissed began to make quiet sense. The debate didn't erase their differences, but it transformed them into stepping stones leading toward a deeper level of understanding. And this was only the beginning. The real questions were still waiting ahead. The moment the next question surfaced, the atmosphere shifted again, and not drastically, but enough that every breath felt a little heavier. It explored a theme people argue about endlessly yet rarely understand clearly, the idea of purpose. The room felt as if it leaned closer, waiting for the thoughts that would follow. Purpose was complicated. It pulled different emotions from different hearts. Some found it uplifting, others found it oppressive, and a few weren't even sure it existed at all. Still, the question demanded honesty, not certainty. So the voice continued, reflecting reflecting on the concept as if holding it up to a light, turning it slowly to see every angle. Life might not hand anyone a ready-made reason to exist, but it does place opportunities in front of them, moments that nudge a person to either create meaning or surrender to emptiness. The idea that meaning must be delivered from the outside felt limiting. It suggested that people were passengers rather than participants. Yet the opposite extreme wasn't entirely convincing either. If everyone created their own purpose without any shared foundation, could society truly function? Would people drift into chaos? Or would they naturally form order out of instinct and empathy? Questions like these made the room feel like a thinking space rather than a debate stage. There was no need for raised voices or defensive postures. The only conflict present was the internal one each listener experienced as the possibilities stretched out before them. Purpose could be divine, discovered, or constructed. Who could say with absolute certainty which of these paths was correct? The reflection deepened, shifting toward the human need for connection. Maybe purpose wasn't a distant goal or a cosmic assignment at all. Maybe it was woven into the small interactions that shape each day. A kind word that softened a difficult moment, a shared laugh that dissolved tension, the decision to help someone without expecting anything back. These tiny gestures might not look like purpose, but they could be the threads that hold the fabric of life together. If purpose was something grand and unreachable, most people would spend their lives feeling like failures. But if it hid inside ordinary moments, then even the smallest effort mattered. It meant every person had the capacity to shape meaning, and not necessarily through monumental achievements, but through consistent acts of intention. The thought extended further, wondering whether suffering itself played a role. Hardship, loss, disappointment, and none of these were pleasant, yet they carved deeper understanding than comfort ever could. People rarely questioned their lives during peaceful times. It was adversity that forced them to examine what they valued, what they feared losing, and what they hoped to become. In that sense, struggle was not just an obstacle but a sculptor, shaping individuals into versions of themselves they might never reach otherwise. And then came a realization that felt both subtle and profound. Purpose might not be a single thing at all. It could evolve, shift, or completely transform as someone grows. What mattered deeply at one stage of life might feel meaningless at another. People change, experiences change them, and with that change comes a new understanding of what life demands from them. The voice concluded the thought with a quiet certainty, not in knowing the answer, but in acknowledging that purpose was too vast to be restricted to a single definition. Maybe the most powerful thing a person could do was simply continue seeking it, shaping it, and allowing it to reshape them in return. The next part of the discussion unfolded with a quieter tone, almost as if the room itself needed a moment to breathe. The question now drifted toward the idea of morality, why people choose to do what they believe is right, and what truly defines right or wrong in a world filled with contradictions. Morality was a concept that seemed simple on the surface yet grew increasingly tangled the more one tried to examine it. Some argued that morality came from rules written long before anyone alive today was born. Others believed it was shaped entirely by society, bending and shifting as cultures evolved. But there was also a third possibility, one that lingered in the air like a whisper. Maybe morality wasn't fixed at all. Maybe it was a constant negotiation between intention, consequence, and empathy. The thought continued deeper, imagining how people often stand at crossroads where no sign reveals the correct path. In such moments, the internal compass won't always point north. It might shake, spin, or fall silent. Yet somehow, most still try to choose the option that harms the least or helps the most. That effort alone said something meaningful about human nature. Even when confused or afraid, people often reached for goodness, even if their version of goodness looked different from someone else's. The conversation shifted toward how judgment plays a role in moral choices. It is easy to criticize another person's decisions without understanding the story behind them. People tend to forget that every action has a history, a context, an unseen weight. A harsh choice might have been shaped by fear. A gentle choice might have required enormous courage. The surface rarely tells the whole truth, As these reflections unfolded, the atmosphere became almost introspective. It wasn't about proving who was right or wrong, it was about exploring why humans struggle so intensely with these questions in the first place. Perhaps morality wasn't meant to be a rigid set of lines but rather a living process, something learned, tested, refined, and sometimes rediscovered. The thought concluded with the idea that true morality might simply be the effort to understand others while also understanding oneself, a continuous attempt to move with compassion, even when confusion clouds the way forward. And in that quiet realization, the room felt a little lighter, as though understanding itself was a small but powerful form of goodness. The next question invited the room into even deeper waters, touching a subject that often hides beneath the surface of everyday life. The influence of fear. It didn't need thunder or drama to make itself known. Fear was quiet, but powerful enough to guide choices, shape relationships, and even rewrite someone's sense of identity. As the idea settled in, the room seemed to steady itself, preparing for a reflection that would not be comfortable but would certainly be honest. Fear wasn't always the villain people imagined it to be. Sometimes it acted like a warning light, urging someone to step carefully or reconsider a path that might lead to unnecessary pain. It protected, it alerted, it demanded attention. But the trouble began when fear stopped being a signal and turned into a story, one that convinced people they were incapable, unworthy, or too fragile to attempt something unfamiliar. That shift, subtle at first, could eventually shape an entire life. The reflection unfolded with the acknowledgement that fear rarely arrives alone. It often drags along self-doubt, hesitation, and the exhausting habit of imagining the worst possible outcomes. People carry fears about failure, rejection, loneliness, embarrassment, and even success. Some fears come from past wounds, others are inherited, passed quietly from one generation to the next. And then there are the fears people never speak aloud, the ones that sit like shadows at the edges of their decisions. As the conversation deepened, a thought emerged. Fear gains power mostly when it hides. When people avoid naming what frightens them, it grows in silence, shaping their actions without their awareness. But when fear is recognized, it is spoken of clearly and without shame, it loses its ability to disguise itself as truth. Naming a fear is not the same as defeating it, but it is the first step toward reclaiming control. The atmosphere shifted into a more contemplative rhythm, considering how fear can distort the way individuals see each other. It can make a person interpret kindness as a threat, or independence as abandonment. It can turn simple misunderstandings into imagined betrayals and ordinary challenges into insurmountable obstacles. Fear, when left unchecked, builds walls faster than any logical argument can tear them down. Yet the discussion refused to paint fear only in darkness. It explored the idea that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Courage is quiet, often unnoticed, and rarely dramatic. It appears in small decisions, a difficult conversation, an apology, a new beginning, a step into uncertainty. Even the choice to keep moving forward after a setback is a form of bravery most people underestimate. The thought expanded, examining how people often assume others are fearless simply because they hide their struggles well. But nearly everyone carries insecurities tucked beneath their confidence, wounds beneath their humor, and doubts beneath their certainty. Realizing this makes it harder to judge and easier to empathize. If fear is universal, then compassion becomes a necessity rather than a luxury. In the closing moments of the reflection, the idea surfaced that fear could also be a teacher. It reveals what someone values, what they long for, and what they cannot bear to lose. It pushes them to confront the parts of themselves they would rather ignore. While it is uncomfortable, it can lead to growth that comfort alone could never inspire. The room seemed calmer by the end, not because fear had been resolved, but because it had been acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement was a quiet strength, the kind that can reshape a life not through force, but through understanding. That discussion now shifted to the nature of belief and how it shapes identity. Belief wasn't merely about religion or ideology, it was a lens through which the world appeared sharper or more blurred, meaningful or arbitrary, safe or threatening. One perspective suggested that beliefs define the boundaries of a person's moral universe. They guide decisions, shape priorities, and provide a sense of coherence in a world that otherwise seems chaotic. A person without belief might drift through life as a leaf on the wind, while someone with a clear set of convictions moves with a direction, even when the path is hard. But belief is also a double-edged sword. It can inspire extraordinary courage, profound empathy, and enduring purpose. Yet it can also justify cruelty, intolerance, or blindness. People will sometimes cling so tightly to belief that they overlook suffering, dismiss evidence, or ignore perspectives that challenge their worldview. The power of belief, then, comes not only from what it affirms, but from what it silences. As the reflection continued, it became clear that belief is intertwined with trust in others, in systems, in ideas, or in forces larger than oneself. Without trust, belief can fragment into skepticism or paranoia. With it, even uncertain ideas can provide the foundation for meaningful action. But the process of trusting and believing is rarely straightforward. Doubt often accompanies belief, not as a flaw, but as a necessary tension. The stronger the doubt, the more deliberate the choice to maintain faith in something larger than oneself. The conversation explored the social dimension of belief. Humans are not solitary creatures. Their convictions are shaped by family, peers, culture, and history. Belief becomes a living network, a conversation between generations and communities. People rarely adopt an idea purely in isolation. They absorb its context, its consequences, and the emotional weight it carries. This can reinforce understanding or entrench misunderstanding. Belief was also linked to action. If someone believes deeply that helping others matters, they are more likely to act compassionately. If they believe the world is hostile, they may act defensively or even aggressively. Beliefs, then, are not abstracted. They ripple outward, shaping behavior, relationships, and even the structures of society. A single conviction, when shared and enacted, can alter communities, economies, and cultures over time. Yet the discussion acknowledged the fragility of belief. People often cling to outdated ideas because the cost of change feels unbearable. Letting go of a long-held belief can feel like losing a part of oneself, like stepping into a void with no visible floor. And yet, evolving belief is sometimes the only path to clarity, justice, or personal growth. Another layer emerged: the ethical responsibility of belief. If a person holds a conviction that affects others, how much reflection is owed before acting? How often do people weigh the consequences of their beliefs versus their desire to assert them? These questions don't have simple answers, but ignoring them can lead to harm even when intentions are pure. The reflection deepened into a subtle tension: belief as freedom versus belief as constraint. On one hand, strong convictions can empower someone to endure difficulty, resist oppression, and pursue lofty ideals. On the other hand, rigid adherence can imprison thought, limit empathy, and foster conflict. Human life often navigates the narrow space between these extremes, seeking the balance where belief strengthens without suffocating. Finally, the thought circled back to curiosity. One perspective argued that true understanding comes not from certainty, but from the willingness to question even sacred or foundational beliefs. To believe responsibly, a person must balance commitment with inquiry, openness with discernment, and reverence with honesty. This delicate equilibrium doesn't resolve all tensions, but it creates the possibility for growth, dialogue, and mutual respect. By the end, belief was no longer a static concept. It was a living, breathing force capable of building, destroying, questioning, and illuminating. And the room, silent for a brief moment, seemed to acknowledge the enormity of the human task: to navigate a world shaped by convictions both their own and those of everyone around them. The focus could now shifted toward the concept of freedom, personal, social, and moral. Freedom wasn't merely the absence of physical constraints. It was an intricate tapestry of choice, responsibility, and consequence. One perspective suggested that humans often confuse freedom with license, the ability to do anything without regard for others. True freedom, however, required awareness. It demanded understanding the impact of one's choices, recognizing the ripple effects of actions, and embracing accountability. Without that awareness, freedom becomes chaos disguised as liberty. The conversation deepened, exploring how freedom interacts with fear. People frequently sacrifice freedom for the comfort of certainty, trading curiosity and autonomy for the security of rules, traditions, or expectations. In this sense, fear and freedom are intertwined. Courageous choices expand freedom, but only if the individual is willing to confront fear honestly. Otherwise, freedom remains theoretical, a possibility unclaimed. Another perspective emphasized the social dimension of freedom. Humans exist in networks, communities, and societies, and individual freedom cannot be disentangled from collective responsibility. A person's choices affect others, sometimes in ways invisible at first glance. True freedom, therefore, requires negotiation, compromise, and empathy. Without considering these, freedom risks becoming oppression in disguise. The debate moved toward moral freedom, whether people are truly free to act ethically, or whether external forces and internal conditioning dictate behavior. Some argued that morality itself can constrain freedom, creating rules that feel obligatory rather than liberating. Yet a counterpoint emerged: without moral frameworks, freedom can lead to harm, selfishness, and destructive impulses. The challenge, then, is to find a balance where freedom empowers rather than enslaves, and where ethical considerations guide without restricting human creativity and expression. The discussion then touched on the role of knowledge and freedom. Ignorance is not merely a lack of information, it is a subtle imprisonment. People who remain unaware of alternative perspectives, possibilities, or consequences may believe themselves free, but they are constrained by their limited understanding. Knowledge expands choice, offering new avenues for action and reflection. Yet knowledge without wisdom can be equally dangerous. Freedom requires not just the ability to act, but the discernment to choose wisely. Another thought emerged: freedom is not constant. It evolves as circumstances, society, and individuals evolve. Choices that felt available yesterday may vanish today, while opportunities that seemed impossible may appear tomorrow. This fluidity means that humans are always negotiating the boundaries of their liberty, often unknowingly. The conversation grew philosophical, examining the relationships between freedom and identity. How much of a person's self is defined by choices freely made, and how much is determined by inherited beliefs, social pressures, or unseen constraints? To claim freedom is to claim authorship over one's story, but authorship comes with responsibility and the weight of consequences. That discussion concluded by reflecting on the paradox of freedom: the more one understands its value, the more one realizes its fragility. Freedom is not merely given, it is claimed, defended, and nurtured every day. It requires vigilance, courage, and empathy, and it is only meaningful when exercised with awareness of its impact on oneself and others. In acknowledging this, the room felt a collective pause, a recognition that freedom is both a gift and a challenge, a source of exhilaration and burden, and an endless pursuit that shapes every human life in profound and unpredictable ways. The final segment of the discussion turned toward the idea of legacy, what individuals leave behind, intentionally or unintentionally, and how those echoes shape the world after they are gone. Legacy wasn't limited to material possessions, achievements, or titles. It encompassed influence, memory, and the intangible ripples of action. One perspective suggested that legacy is less about grand gestures and more about consistent, small choices, the kindness offered without expectation, the wisdom shared without self-interest, the courage shown when no one is watching. These quiet moments accumulate, creating an imprint that persists beyond a single lifetime. Another voice argued that legacy is inseparable from connection. Humans are social creatures, and their impact is measured largely in relation to others. A person's life is not lived in isolation, it touches family, friends, communities, and even strangers. Every decision, every act of empathy or harm, reverberates in ways that may remain invisible for decades. In this sense, legacy is not a solitary achievement, it is a network of influence woven through relationships and society. The conversation delved into the tension between intention and outcome. Sometimes, people act with noble intentions but inadvertently cause harm. Other times, unintended consequences produce unforeseen good. Legacy, therefore, is not always predictable, and it cannot be fully controlled. It exists in the interplay between choice, chance, and perception. Understanding this complexity was humbling, revealing how fragile yet resilient the human imprint can be. Reflection then turned inward, exploring personal responsibility. If actions echo far beyond the present moment, how should one navigate decisions in daily life? How does a person balance self-interest with the potential impact on others? The debate suggested that living consciously attentive to one's behavior and its possible consequences is one of the most meaningful ways to shape a positive legacy. Awareness and reflection, it seemed, were as important as action itself. That discussion also examined the idea of cultural and historical legacy. Individuals are born into worlds shaped by countless lives before them. Traditions, beliefs, innovations, and mistakes all form a foundation that influences current choices. Legacy, then, is not just what a person leaves behind, but what they inherit, reinterpret, and pass forward. Each life becomes a bridge, connecting past, present, and future in a continuous chain of influence. Another layer emerged around moral and ethical legacy. Beyond tangible actions, the values someone embodies the honesty, integrity, compassion, and courage displayed can leave a lasting impression. Even if tangible achievements fade, the principles a person lives by can inspire others, shaping decisions and actions in ways that endure longer than material markers ever could. The discussion turned philosophical as it considered the inevitability of impermanence. All legacies, no matter how profound, are eventually transformed by time, perception, and circumstance. Yet impermanence does not diminish significance. The impact of a life is measured not by permanence, but by depth, resonance, and the degree to which it alters experiences, perspectives, and possibilities for others. Finally, the room reflected on the ultimate question: how should one live knowing that every choice contributes to a larger, unseen narrative? The conversation suggested that striving for kindness, curiosity, courage, and understanding is more meaningful than seeking recognition or reward. Legacy is built quietly, persistently, and often invisibly, but its presence is undeniable in the lives touched, the ideas shared, and the influence that spreads outward in unexpected ways. As the discussion concluded, there was a sense of continuity rather than closure. The questions, reflections, and tensions raised were not fully resolved yet. They never could be. Yet the conversation itself had created a moment of clarity. Life is shaped by choices, guided by purpose, colored by belief, tempered by fear, and amplified by the impact on others. In that intricate interplay, every human existence carries weight, and every conscious effort to live meaningfully becomes part of a legacy that reaches beyond the confines of a single life.